Forget the movies. Forget the green hills of the Shire. J.R.R. Tolkien found this story in the trenches of World War I. The ring is not a magic toy. It is the heavy burden of trauma. It destroys the mind before it touches the body. Frodo is not an adventurer. He is a drafted soldier, marching to a death he did not choose. This is not a fantasy. This is a survivor's diary. Welcome to the soul autopsy of the Fellowship of the Ring.
Welcome to Spotlight Reads. Today we are performing a soul autopsy on the Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is not a fantasy adventure. It is a psychological record of burden, fear, and irreversible exhaustion. Our examination will proceed through 4 distinct stages. First, we'll establish a baseline profile of the subjects to determine their initial psychological vulnerabilities. From there, we will conduct an analysis of the primary pathogenic artifact. Then, we will assess the external threats that act as catalysts for degradation. And finally, we will analyze the subject's decay and the inevitable system failure of their collective unit. We begin with Case File 1, Subject Baseline Profile. Here, we're assessing the foundational psychology of the subjects known as hobbits. You have to understand their initial state to truly chart their subsequent collapse. The records provide this initial description of the hobbits' disposition. Now, this isn't a description of a peaceful culture. It is a diagnosis of a systemic vulnerability. This preference for a well-ordered countryside points to a psyche that is deeply dependent on external stability. And that dependency becomes a critical flaw when it's exposed to chaotic, non-linear threats. The historical record also notes a complete and total absence of any military conditioning. And that right there is a crucial data point, not warlike. What that really means is a lack of psychological inoculation against sustained, high-stress encounters. Their entire society hasn't produced the necessary coping mechanisms for trauma, for prolonged fear, or for the moral corrosion of conflict. Psychologically speaking, they are unprotected subjects about to enter an extremely hostile environment. So our baseline assessment is, well, it's conclusive. The subject's core predisposition is to order and the avoidance of conflict. This creates a profound vulnerability. They are highly susceptible to psychological shock, to acute trauma, and to what we call mimetic hazards, hostile ideas that can literally infect and overwrite individuals' will. Their very nature is a pre-existing condition for mental collapse under the pressures we're about to examine. And that brings us to Case File 2, Artifact Analysis. The primary catalyst in this case is the object known as the One Ring. It is essential to understand this not as a simple tool, but as a hostile, parasitic intelligence. The artifact is, for all intents and purposes, an autonomous pathogenic agent. Its design is for psychological conquest, not physical. Its primary function is the systematic erosion and, eventually, the complete replacement of the host's will. It doesn't just tempt, it actively reprograms the host's mind and emotions until they are totally dependent. It looks after itself. The artifact's function is encoded directly into its lore. Let's be very clear, this is not poetry. It is a statement of operational design. To rule them, to find them, to bring them, to bind them. These are the functional imperatives of a weapon of absolute control. That last clause, in the darkness bind them, it describes the end state, the permanent severing of the individual from their own identity, leaving them trapped in a psychic prison dictated by the artifact and its maker. The process of corruption follows a very clear, very predictable sequence. It begins with an engineered psychological attachment, making the host pathologically possessive. Next, it perverts the host's will, twisting good intentions into justifications for its use. This leads to sensory distortion, paranoia, isolation. And the final stage, the complete dissolution of self, as we see in the case of the subject Smeagol, whose personality was entirely subsumed by the new artifact-dependent identity, Gollum. Moving to Case File 3, External Threat Assessment. The psychological pressure from the artifact doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is massively amplified by the active pursuit of hostile entities, which are referred to as the Nine. These beings function as a mobile projection of their maker's will. This is first-hand testimony from a civilian hobbit's encounter with one of these entities. Note how the account emphasizes its unnatural, deeply unsettling presence. The subject focuses on sensory details that are designed to induce fear and disorientation. black-like, stooped over me, the sound hissed. This isn't a conventional physical encounter. It's a psychological assault engineered to bypass rational defenses and trigger a primal, uncontrollable fear response. The record is explicit. It states the primary methodology of these agents is terror. Exactly. And let's be clear, terror isn't some byproduct of their actions. It is the weapon. It's a non-conventional tool designed to induce paralysis, despair, and a total breakdown of cognitive function in its targets. Their effectiveness isn't measured in physical casualties, but in the degree of psychological collapse they can inflict. An analysis of their tactics confirms this beyond any doubt. Yes, physical actions are documented, a drawn blade, a pursuit, but these are all secondary to their primary tools. The Black Breath, which induces a state of near-fatal despair that presents with a thin, piercing chill, and the ambient aura of fear. These are their most potent weapons. They seek to break the mind long before they ever need to break the body. The goal is not merely to capture the artifact, but to ensure its bearer is psychologically shattered in the process. And now we reach the final stage. Case File 4, Subject Degradation and System Failure. We will now turn to the cumulative effect of all these pressures on the subjects, both as individuals and as a collective, observing the symptoms of psychological erosion and the eventual fragmentation of their group. This testimony describes the consequence of a physical attack on the primary subject, Frodo Baggins. The Morgul knife is not a simple weapon. Think of it more as a vector for a forced, hostile psychological transformation. The splinter that remains inside the wound functions like a slow-acting neurotoxin, but one that targets the psyche itself. The goal, as stated, is to make the subject become like they are, to overwrite their consciousness, to transform them into a wraith. It is a biological delivery system for psychological dominion. The clinical outcome is documented as fading. This is not a mystical term. It describes a systematic dissolution of the subject's being, that sensation of being thin and stretched. Physically, the subject becomes less present in our dimension. Psychologically, their identity is eroded, pulled into the shadow world, which is the psychic space controlled by the enemy. For 17 straight days, the subject was being actively, systematically unmade. This testimony from the subject Gimli, a dwarf, is critical. It demonstrates that the psychological damage was not confined to the primary subject. Yes, this is highly significant. The dwarven subject comes from a culture renowned for its immense fortitude. Yet he identifies an emotional event, a parting, as his worst wound, surpassing any physical torment he had ever endured. This shows the mission's terrifying capacity to inflict deep trauma, even on the most hardened members of the collective. Exposure to a brief moment of peace made the subsequent return to darkness exponentially more damaging. The collapse of the collective, you see, was never a possibility. It was an inevitability. It's a simple, cascading system failure. Constant exposure to fear erodes rational judgment. The artifact itself actively isolates its bearer, breeding deep paranoia. External pressures then exploit these internal divisions, like the raging fire in the subject Boromir, whose mental collapse was a direct forensic result of the artifact's proximity. Individual psychological wounds then lead to collective fragmentation. Ultimately, the mission's objective, to carry a weapon of pure psychological corruption, is fundamentally antithetical to the mental preservation of its agents. The system was designed to fail. And this leads to our final, analytical question. The pressure applied to these subjects was engineered to deform and ultimately erase the self. The subject, Frodo Baggins, does survive the initial ordeal, but the record shows he is never healed. He becomes a permanent casualty, unable to exist in the very world he fought to preserve. This forces the central question. When the cost of mission success is the complete erosion of the individual's identity, what is the value of that success? What exactly is left to save when the self is gone? This isn't just a story, it's a warning. If you are ready to see the truth, subscribe to Spotlight Reads. Face the abyss.
This is the brief on the hidden reality of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. So we're going to strip away all the magic for a minute. We're diving into the author's notes to reveal that this epic fantasy was actually forged in the chaos of war. And that makes it far less an adventure story and far more a devastating account of psychological conflict and just survival. First, you've got to know, the trilogy was literally written during World War II. Tolkien worked on it all the way to 1949, right through what he called the darkness of the next 5 years. So you see, the story isn't escapism. It's a historical document of what it takes to survive. So if war is the forge, what happens when that external chaos gets inside the hero? Well, second, forget magic. The One Ring is pure, debilitating addiction. Gandalf doesn't just say it'll tempt a mortal. No, he warns it will utterly overcome them and possess them. And that's exactly why Frodo can't willingly destroy it. It's why he feels it's both heavy and altogether precious. It's a psychological parasite that's completely overriding his own self-preservation. And finally, the hobbits don't just leave their home, the Shire. They lose all hope of ever truly going back. Frodo himself knows his journey is, in his words, to lose one and not return. The moment they step out, the enemy's agents, the Black Riders, are already hunting them, which confirms their capacity for peace is just instantly destroyed. The truth of the quest is that survival isn't victory. Its price is the destruction of the hero's capacity for peace itself.